He had become Professor of Architecture at the Royal Academy, and he was the first recipient of the Royal Gold Medal for Architecture, something that continues annually to this very year. So if you were to think of what that meant, it meant he got the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. And he was the man who designed this building. So he died 40 years after he designed the Gilson School. And at that stage, he was at the summit of his profession. But what I want to do is go back to meet a much younger man. In 1810, so he would have been 22, he went on what was called the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour was where people who were wealthy and well educated would head off to Italy, to parts of southern France, to Greece, to Asia Minor, now the west coast of Turkey, Anatolia. But the Napoleonic Wars were in process, so he couldn't really do all of that. So what he did instead was took the southern route, went to Malta, went to Cadiz, went to Constantinople, now Istanbul, and he finished in Athens, and he spent time in Athens. And during his time in Athens, his two studies, because he was also an archaeologist, came together, and he spent time, he was a tremendous diarist. He wrote a diary every day of his life until he got very busy. So all the time that we knew him, in the sense of that he was involved here, he wrote a diary almost every day. And he would do sketches, he would visit buildings, he would write down what he thought about them, he would analyse them, and he became one of the great authorities on classical architecture in that time. And we're getting the benefit of that. And I'm going to keep going back and saying things like that because I think we don't quite understand how important these buildings are. So, 1810, he continues that. One of the people he met, and I don't know if he's relevant or not relevant, was Sir Francis Beaufort. Beaufort, from Navan, officer of the British Royal Navy, had been injured and spent a lot of his time observing the stars, making calculations, and coming up with what we all know as the Beaufort scale, which you hear every night in weather forecasts, and you hear a force 10 or a force 3 or a force whatever it might be. But he became friendly with Beaufort, and whether that's the connection with Napper or not, I really have no idea, and maybe some people do, I don't. But somehow or other, he was engaged in 1820 by J.R.W. Napper to design Rockroom House. Now, that was a bit odd. He had started his practice in 1817, so 3 years, so no great body of work. Nothing much to say, this is what I've done or this is what I can do. Yet he was given this, and it was the biggest thing by far which he'd been asked to do at that time. Now, even more peculiar again, I find this extraordinary, someone who does what I do. The first time he saw the building, the first time he saw the site, was in 1823. At that stage it was nearly built. So everything was done remotely, everything was done at a distance. And then in 1823 he came here. I'll get back to that in a minute. We go back to what happened when he was in Asia Minor. Like his compatriot Lord Elgin, he was a little bit upset at what was happening to a lot of the ancient ruins. Because the entire area was under Ottoman rule, it was under Turkish rule. So their idea of a good Sunday afternoon was to take pot shots at the Greek temples with their cannon. And Lord Elgin, as you I'm sure know, took the frieze from the Parthenon, agreed with the Turkish rulers that he could purchase it, and took it back, and it's now in the British Museum. Now, whether it should still be in the British Museum is a different argument. I think at the time it was probably the correct thing to do. Well, our friend Charles Robert Cockerell did the same. He did it as though at a different place. He did it at the temple of Apollo at a place called Bastia. And those figures that he took back are still in the British Museum. So, at the age of 27, he sets up his practice. Somehow, perhaps because of Beaufort, he's asked to design this building, made acquainted with the place, and he agrees to produce this house for J.R.W. Napper. Now, Napper and he, James Lennox, William Napper, were almost contemporaries. Maybe they knew each other. Maybe at school they knew. I have no idea. I really don't know at all. I can find nothing that tells me any of this. But one was born, Cockerell was born in 1788, Napper in 1791. Cockerell died in 1863, Napper in 1868. So, nearly the same age, nearly the same, both young men when we meet them for the first time. So he started work in Loughcrew in 1820, and all his other work in Ireland, every part of it, has a Loughcrew connection. And it is confined to those early years of the 1820s. Now, after that, he had a much longer career, which I'll tell you something of in a moment. But here he worked on Loughcrew House, he worked on the Gilson Schools, he worked on Cross Drum House, and he worked on Kinturk House, which is in Castle Pollard, which was done for William Dutton Pollard, Castle Pollard, who, as it happened, was a cousin of Manners. So, as I said, he never saw the site until he came here in 1823, but he had an agent that he had recruited himself, and he looked after the building of it, and he had a really poor name for a builder. He was called Mr. Topham. And Mr. Topham looked after it. And presumably not the right name, because it seems to have stood very well until fire took it on a number of occasions, as we know. But the energy of Charles Robert Cochrane was extraordinary. In 1823, he was 35 years old. He came to Ireland for the first of 2 times. He came again in 1825. Here's what he did in 9 days. He took the steam packet from Liverpool. He landed in Waterford. He spent a day going around Waterford. He sketched buildings. He did little critiques of them in his diary. He then continued to Dublin. He got to Dublin on the next day. He viewed and sketched and critiqued the GPO, Trinity College, the Custom House, the Bank of Ireland, City Hall, which was then the Coin Exchange, and he met Francis Johnson, who was the architect of the GPO. From Dublin, and now we have no railways, we have stagecoaches, or we have poor roads, presumably. From Dublin, he continued to Loughcrew. He spent long enough here to see the work that was being carried on. Made lots of notes about it. He then went to Dundalk. He looked at the new courthouse in Dundalk and was unhappy with the siting of it. He then went to Hillsborough, and he then went to Belfast. And he did all that in 9 days. He was back in 1825 for an even shorter time, but he still managed to get to Kilruddery, Castletown, Summerhill, and a 4th house, which I can't recall. He was well respected all through his career as a person who really understood the classical orders and how they should be put together and how they should be assembled and what proportion was and what was correct and what was not correct. And during the course of this time, he was not afraid to criticise. And in his diaries, he enjoyed the work of Francis Johnson in the GPO and some other work that he had done as well, particularly in the Bank of Ireland, as you now know the Bank of Ireland in Parliament House. He was less impressed by James Gandon, who was the great old man of Irish architecture at that stage and had done the Custom House in the forecourts. Gandon died later in the same year, but presumably not because of the criticism. But he criticised the Custom House. And he said of the Custom House that he got the scale of some of the orders wrong, almost ridiculous. And the statues on the pediment are quite laughable. And as I said, he liked Francis Johnson's work at the GPO better. And Johnson would have been a more severe architect in the same way as Cochrane was. Interestingly, he wasn't blind to his own work. And he found time to criticise his own work at Loughcrew, which he said was very plain, was too bald, and really was a square house, although admirably executed. And this was his work. Now you could, in a way, say almost the same about the Gilson Schools. They're bald, they're plain, but they're subtle in very many ways. Now, what I want to do is just spend a minute or two looking at Loughcrew. These pictures, some of you will see again, the Gilson School, which you know so well. And a lot of the interests of the days and what I'm interested in now, I think started in that classroom, which I was in for the first time only a couple of months ago, the first time since 1968. This is a figure you'll all be familiar with. The view across to Loughcrew and to the portico of Loughcrew. Any of you who've been on your holidays to Greece, if you've been to somewhere like Delphi, you'll understand the importance of siting to the ancient Greeks. And from that you understand the importance of siting to Charles Robert Cochrane. And it's a beautifully sited house. It was, as he said, a square house and quite a plain house in many ways. And oddly, and unlike the Gilson schools, it's not a Palladian house in the sense of having two wings. You'd be familiar probably with Castletown or Rusper or one of those houses, which is a central house, two arcs, carved would be much the same, and then two pavilions at the end. Well, this doesn't. Everything is to the left-hand side. Everything goes down towards the farm buildings on the left. To the right-hand side is just the square end of the house. Severe neoclassical cubic building made of, and again there's some discussion about this, as I understand it, Bracken limestone. Pre-Portugal, on the other side, on the garden side, more Italian, exceptional masonry, exceptional quality of work, and nowhere better, and this I really would invite you to go and see, nowhere more finely seen than in the gatehouse that still exists. In my eyes, one of the finest small buildings in the country. Beautifully made, beautiful limestone, wonderfully proportioned, and dramatically sited. As you know, in most cases the gatehouse is on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. Cochrane didn't want that. He wanted something more symmetrical, more something you saw as you approached, something that set some drama, and something that really was going to give you a vista. So with Slieve Collar behind you, and this beautiful little Greek building in front of you, and the gates coming out, I mean, what was a more beautiful exit to any building in the country? But I wonder if any of you have ever noticed that third chimney. I wonder what it does. I think it was put there for balance, for visual balance. I don't expect it does anything, but it's always intriguing. If you look at the quality of the work of this, look at the limestone, look at the lines on the limestone. In his specification for the work of the Gilson schools, he even gives direction on how the stone is to be chiselled. Well, he must have done the same here. Greek influences, but beautiful workmanship. Now, if you look at the website of the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, it'll tell you that this building dates from 1780. Now, that would make him a better prodigy than Mozart, who started composing when he was 4 or 5. It would have meant that Cochrane designed this 8 years before he was born. So, the correct date, as you know, is about 1823. It's just a beautiful building, and a beautifully sited building, and really an adornment to the entire town.